You want to own a soccer club. You picture yourself sitting in the owner's box. The stadium's sold out. Your team scores in the last minute. 50,000 people lose their minds. Your name gets chanted. Life is good. Here's the thing nobody tells you before you write the check. Owning a soccer club is the only business on the planet where you can spend $1 billion, win the championship, and still lose money that year. And most owners know this going in. They buy it anyway. Soccer is the most popular sport in the world. 3.5 billion people follow it. It generates over $50 billion in global club revenue annually. The most valuable soccer club on earth, Real Madrid, is now worth $9.5 billion, according to Forbes' 2026 rankings. That is more than any NFL franchise. And yet, across the 20 clubs in England's Premier League, the richest domestic soccer league in the world, the combined operating loss in the 2024/25 season was £1.7 billion. 17 of the 20 clubs finished the year in the red. So why do billionaires keep buying in? By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how soccer club economics work, how clubs actually make money, what the transfer market is really doing to their finances, what happens when a club gets relegated and loses access to the money machine overnight, and why the richest owners in the world are willing to absorb years of losses to hold on to something that, on paper, makes no financial sense. We'll cover 6 segments. Each one will change how you watch the game. Let's start with the price of admission. Buying a soccer club is not one thing. It is a wildly different purchase depending on which league, which country, and which moment in the business cycle you're entering. Let's break it into 2 worlds, American soccer and European soccer. Same sport, completely different financial universes. In the United States, MLS operates like a traditional North American sports league. You don't buy into a competitive pyramid, you buy a franchise, and that franchise fee alone tells you everything about how fast this market has moved. In 1998, the Chicago Fire joined MLS for a franchise fee of $5 million. In 2007, Toronto FC paid $10 million. By 2015, New York City FC paid $100 million. By 2019, Charlotte FC paid $325 million. And in 2023, San Diego FC's ownership group paid a record $500 million just for the right to enter the league. The total investment, including infrastructure and setup costs, was reported to potentially exceed $700 million before the team played a single game. That same club, if you bought it today, would be worth what Forbes estimates the average MLS franchise is valued at, over $600 million. And MLS teams trade at an average of 9.3 times revenue, reflecting the enormous optimism built into the American soccer market ahead of the 2026 World Cup on U.S. soil. Now cross the Atlantic. In England, there is no protection. There is a pyramid. Teams get promoted and relegated between divisions based entirely on results. You can buy a Premier League club for hundreds of millions, and if the team performs badly enough, you're playing second division soccer next year, and the financial consequences of that are devastating. We'll get to that. Premier League clubs range from around $500 million for a mid-table side to $6.5 billion for Manchester United. Real Madrid, the most valuable club in the world, is sitting at $9.5 billion as of the 2026 Forbes rankings, generating $1.27 billion in revenue in the 2024/25 season, the highest annual revenue ever recorded by a sports team in Forbes history. Here's the catch in both cases. The purchase price is just the entry fee. The ongoing costs are where owners either build empires or get buried. Every soccer club, from a Premier League giant to a mid-table MLS side, makes money from the same 3 places. Understanding these 3 revenue streams is the entire foundation of the business. Stream 1, broadcast money. This is the biggest one. The Premier League signed a domestic broadcast deal worth roughly £5 billion over 3 years. That money gets split among all 20 clubs, with a portion divided equally and a portion based on where you finish in the table. In the 2024/25 season, title winners. Liverpool received £174.9 million in Premier League broadcast distributions alone. The club that finished last received over £100 million. Meanwhile, a typical club in the Championship England's second division receives approximately £8 million in TV solidarity payments. That gap, £100 million versus £8 million, is the financial cliff that defines English soccer. One bad season and you fall off it. We'll come back to that. In MLS, broadcast money is distributed centrally and more equally, but at far smaller scales than the Premier League. The league is still building its rights value ahead of what most expect will be a major uplift post 2026 World Cup. Stream 2, commercial revenue, shirt sponsorships, kit deals, stadium naming rights, global brand partnerships. This is where the big clubs separate themselves from everyone else. Manchester City's training kit deal with Puma, Arsenal's partnership with Adidas, Real Madrid's decades-long commercial empire that includes sponsorships, global tours, and a fully renovated Bernabeu stadium that hosts concerts and events far beyond 90 minutes of soccer. In the 2024/25 season, Premier League clubs collectively crossed £2 billion in commercial revenue for the second consecutive year, driven primarily by the six biggest clubs, who account for roughly three-quarters of the total. For smaller clubs, commercial revenue is limited by fan base and global recognition. You can't sell a jersey in Indonesia if nobody in Indonesia knows your club exists. Stream 3, matchday revenue, ticket sales, hospitality, concessions, merchandise on site. In 2024/25, Premier League clubs generated approaching £1 billion combined in matchday revenue, a record. But here's the kicker. Matchday revenue is the smallest of the three streams, and it is completely capped by the size of your stadium. Manchester United plays at Old Trafford. It holds 74,000 seats. That stadium is already full. You cannot add revenue by selling one more ticket. To grow, you either charge more per seat or build a bigger venue. Old Trafford is currently undergoing a major renovation project that will expand and modernize it at significant capital cost. For the lower-ranked clubs in the Premier League, 60 to 87% of all revenue comes from broadcast. That makes them entirely dependent on staying in the division to survive financially. For the Big Six, commercial revenue is the new frontier, growing by 13% in 2024/25, because it's the one stream with no ceiling. Now let's talk about where all that money goes. Because no matter how fast revenue grows in soccer, there is one cost that has grown faster every single year for 3 decades straight: wages. In the 2024/25 season, Premier League clubs paid a combined £4.4 billion in wages, a record. The wage-to-revenue ratio across the league averaged 65%. Every dollar that came in, 65 cents went straight to the payroll before any other operating expense was covered. Manchester City's total squad cost wages plus player amortization hit £578 million in 2024/25. Chelsea was close behind at £572 million. Liverpool was at £545 million. For the biggest clubs, this is not a surprise or a problem, it is a deliberate strategy. You spend on players because players are what generate the results that unlock Champions League participation. And Champions League participation is where the next layer of money lives. UEFA distributions to English clubs in 2024/25 totaled £474 million, up 22% year over year, driven by an expanded Champions League format. But here's the problem for mid-table and smaller clubs. When the broadcast deal goes up, which it does, every 3 years, clubs do not save the extra money. They spend it on wages. This cycle has repeated itself so reliably across 3 decades of Premier League history that sports economists have a name for it. It's called the broadcast wage cycle, and it goes like this. New broadcast deal arrives. Revenue jumps. Clubs immediately hire and retain more expensive players. Wages jump by a similar percentage. Net profitability stays roughly flat. Then the cycle repeats. Here's the brutal result of all of this. In the 2024/25 Premier League season, the combined net result across all 20 clubs was an operating loss of £1.7 billion, the highest ever on record. 17 of the 20 clubs were losing money, and yet wages kept going up, transfers kept happening, and stadiums kept filling. Because in soccer, the alternative, spending less on players and finishing lower in the table, doesn't just hurt your pride. It can destroy your business. Which brings us to the most dangerous word in club ownership: relegation. This is the part of soccer economics that Americans struggle to fully appreciate, because nothing like it exists in American sports. In the NFL, the worst team in the league still plays in the NFL next year. They might get a better draft pick, but they stay. In soccer, the worst 3 teams in the Premier League get sent down to the Championship, England's second division. And what happens to their finances when they fall is nothing short of catastrophic. A club finishing last in the Premier League is receiving over £100 million in broadcast distributions during that season. The year after they're relegated, they receive approximately £8 million from the Championship. That is a revenue drop of over £90 million in a single year. Research from sports finance firm Swiss Ramble found that, on average, relegated Premier League clubs suffer a revenue decline of 41% in the season, immediately following their drop. Now, add to that the wage bill. The players who signed on to play Premier League soccer did not sign contracts with a clause that reduces their salary if the team gets relegated. In most cases, they are still owed the same wages. A wage bill built for a club generating £150 million per year is suddenly being paid out of a club generating £90 million. The math doesn't work. The club starts losing money fast. The Premier League introduced parachute payments to soften this fall, a system where relegated clubs continue to receive declining percentages of broadcast money for up to 3 years. In year 1, a relegated club receives roughly 55% of a Premier League equal share, which works out to around £44 to £50 million. In year 2, 45%. In year 3, 20%. Sounds helpful. Here's the problem. A club losing £130 million in broadcast revenue that receives £70 million in parachute payments in year 1 still has a £60 million hole in its budget, and the parachute shrinks each year after that. Leicester City won the Premier League title in 2016. By April 2026, they were relegated from the Championship to League One, England's third division, after back-to-back relegations from the top flight. Their revenue fell from £187 million during their Premier League days to a projected £60 million in League One. The average League One club earns around £10 million per year. Leicester will be richer than their competition and still potentially unable to meet their own costs. Relegation doesn't just change your league standing, it triggers a financial emergency that can take years to resolve. Clubs that survive in the Premier League aren't just staying competitive, they are defending the single most important financial asset they own, their seat at the table. And here's the cruel twist. The parachute payments that help relegated clubs also create a competitive imbalance in the Championship, where a relegated club can spend £40 to £45 million on wages, while a native Championship club typically spends £15 to £25 million, making it harder for clubs without Premier League history to compete for promotion. The clubs that already had wealth, which is how most of these systems work. Here's where things get genuinely strange, because the mechanism that clubs use to try to improve their performance, buying players, is also one of the primary mechanisms by which they destroy their own finances. In 2024, clubs around the world spent $8.59 billion on international transfers, the second highest annual total in soccer history, after the $9.63 billion record set in 2023. English clubs alone spent $1.88 billion on incoming transfers in 2024. When a club buys a player, they don't expense the entire fee in the year of purchase. They spread the cost across the player's contract length through a process called amortization. It's an accounting convention borrowed from corporate finance, and it is how clubs can rationalize spending $100 million on a single player without the entire loss showing up on this year's books. Chelsea signed approximately £1.5 billion in players over 3 seasons from 2022 to 2025. As a result, their annual player amortization charge broke £200 million, the first club in Premier League history to do so. That means Chelsea is carrying £200 million per year in amortization charges, just from past transfer decisions, before a single new player is purchased. Here's the other side of the coin. Player trading is also how some clubs generate their profits. Brighton and Hove Albion have become famous for a model built around scouting undervalued talent, developing them, and selling them for multiples of what they paid. In a recent season, Brighton generated over £133 million in profit, largely from player sales, making them one of the only top-flight clubs in England actually running a net positive. Their model is admired across the sport and almost impossible to replicate without the scouting infrastructure they've built over years. The transfer market is not a tool for buying trophies, or rather it is, but the bill comes in the form of amortization, wages, and the ever-present risk that the £80 million player you bought turns out to be worth £35 million 18 months later because of injuries or poor form. Every major transfer is effectively a multi-year financial bet. Get it right, and you are. Liverpool, building a dynasty with players who grow in value. Get it wrong, and you are a long list of clubs that have spent their way into financial distress. So if most clubs run at losses, wages consume 65 cents of every dollar earned. Relegation can wipe out $100 million in revenue overnight. And the transfer market is a high-stakes gamble. Why are billionaires lining up to buy soccer clubs? The answer tells you everything about what this asset actually is. In almost every other industry, you buy a business to generate cash returns. You measure it by EBITDA, by margin, by what the business pays you while you hold it. By that measure, most soccer clubs are objectively terrible investments, but the owners who are getting rich off soccer clubs are not getting rich from the profits of running them. They are getting rich from asset appreciation. In MLS, this is the most obvious. The San Diego expansion fee in 2023 was $500 million. But look at the trajectory. $5 million in 1998, $10 million in 2007, $100 million in 2015, $500 million in 2023. Every person who got in early has watched their asset multiply. Inter Miami, owned by David Beckham and his partners, is now the most valuable MLS franchise, worth over $1.35 billion as of 2026. Beckham's group paid $25 million for their expansion rights in 2018. That is a 54-to-1 return, before a single penny of operating profit. In Europe, the same logic applies at a larger scale. Real Madrid is worth $9.5 billion today. Every owner who held European clubs through the explosion of Premier League broadcast revenue from the early 1990s to today saw their assets grow at rates that dwarfed the stock market. And beyond pure financial return, soccer clubs deliver something that no other asset class can: global visibility, political capital, and social influence that is almost impossible to purchase any other way. Roman Abramovich used Chelsea to build a global profile. The Abu Dhabi royal family used Manchester City to reposition the United Arab Emirates on the world stage and won 5 Premier League titles in the process. Saudi Arabia's public investment fund used Newcastle United as part of the same geopolitical playbook. This category of buyer is not asking whether the club makes money. They are asking whether the club builds the kind of power and relevance that money alone cannot buy. Here is the best one-sentence summary of soccer club economics. The operating business usually loses money. The asset almost always appreciates. That is not true of most businesses. It is uniquely true of elite soccer clubs because the supply of top division franchises is permanently limited. Demand from a global audience of 3.5 billion fans is permanently growing, and the media rights that feed the whole machine keep increasing every cycle. 7 MLS clubs now appear in the Forbes top 30 most valuable soccer clubs in the world. That would have been unthinkable 15 years ago. And with the 2026 World Cup set to be hosted across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, the largest World Cup in history, the valuation story for American clubs is only beginning. Here is what you now understand that most people watching the game don't. A soccer club's revenue comes from 3 streams: broadcast, commercial, and matchday. The richest clubs have engineered enormous commercial empires that fund their dominance. The smaller clubs live and die on broadcast money, and the gap between the top division and the one below it is not a step down. It's a fall off a cliff. Wages eat 65% of revenue across the Premier League and have driven the industry to a combined £1.7 billion operating loss in a single season. The transfer market amplifies this, creating multi-year financial bets that can either build dynasties or bury balance sheets. Chelsea built a massive squad. So did the amortization tab. Relegation is not a sporting disappointment. It's a financial emergency. Leicester City won a championship title in 2016. By 2026, they were in League One. The sport does not protect you from the math, and through all of this, the losses, the risks, the wages, the transfer fees, the asset keeps appreciating. Because the global audience keeps growing. Because the World Cup is coming. Because owning a soccer club is the closest thing to owning a nation's emotional infrastructure, and there will always be someone willing to pay more for that than the last person did. The operating business is a money pit. The asset is a rocket ship. What you have to decide is whether you can survive long enough in the pit to catch the ride. If this changed how you think about soccer as a business, drop a like. It takes 1 second and it means a lot. And comment below. Would you rather own an MLS club with the safety net and the growth trajectory, or take a swing at a European club with all the glory and all the risk?